I've had a lot of requests for lighting tutorials, so I'm just going to do a quick series, maybe 8 or 9 tutorials where we go through lighting from a very basic introduction to some of the more kind of advanced features of lighting in Cinema 4D. So this is chapter 1, and I'm basically going to go through the very basics of lighting for beginners. So I've got this simple scene set up. We've got some walls here with a brick texture and 2 spheres, which I'm going to use to kind of show off the lighting. And the most common type of light is, if you create a light from here, it's the Omni light. And these are kind of very handy. They're just kind of small lights which kind of emit in all directions, unlike a spotlight, which is kind of very specific as to where it kind of illuminates, you know, and you can adjust the cone. So we've got spotlights, we've got infinite lights, which are pretty much sort of like sunlight, and then we've got area lights, which are kind of, imagine this entire area is emitting light, so it's almost like a kind of, it's almost like an object-based light, and this is the object. And area lights are actually very good. They create kind of very soft shadows if you've got shadows enabled here, and but the render times are quite slow with area lights. And shadows, we've got 4 different types. We've got none, soft shadow maps. Now shadow maps are kind of quite low res. You can bump up the kind of resolution, but they're a cheap way of calculating shadows. Ray trace they kind of do have a hard look. Ray trace shadows, they're very kind of they take on the object's shape, and they're very harsh around the edges. And then area shadows are probably the best option. They're very soft and realistic, but they take longer to render. So I'm just going to go back to this Omni light, and as you can see, it's kind of lighting up the scene. And another lighting trick is, if you're setting up lighting in any scene, it's best to use a minimum of 3 lights, and that's how the kind of movies do it in music videos. Like, you should always aim for a minimum of 3, otherwise your lighting is going to look quite flat and just kind of boring. So what you want is, you want a main light, which we usually call the key light, and then if I just duplicate this, I'm going to call this a fill light, which is a kind of less intense light, and you can adjust the intensity here. I'm going to drop this down significantly, and a fill light just kind of brings out those like dark areas, so they're not kind of pitch black. And it's also a good idea to use a backlight, or sometimes it's called a rim light, and that basically goes behind an object usually. And as you can see here, it kind of brings out kind of the edges. It just gives like a kind of crescent of light on the edge. So if I just render this scene, you can see there. And I mean, you can set these up any way you want. There's no kind of set rules, but it's just a good idea to use 3 lights: a key light, a fill light, and a backlight. As you can see here, just gives it a kind of more of a 3D effect, and it makes the objects kind of stand out. Another trick is to basically color your lights. So if I go to the key light, I can make this key light an orange here. Just click on the color and change the color. And then I'm going to make my backlight a blue. And for some reason, orange and blue lights kind of combined actually look quite good. I'm just going to lessen the blue, maybe make my fill light kind of, I'm going to make my fill light a bit bluer. And yeah, when you combine colored lights, you can just kind of add that extra bit of depth and just make the scene kind of generally more interesting. Now, these are very kind of basic features I've gone through, but there are some very basic features that people don't know about, and that's the options down here. Now, I've got my key light selected, which is this one here, and basically what I can do is I can check this no illumination, and it actually kind of disables that light. Although it's in the scene, it's not kind of casting any illumination. So I'm just going to uncheck that, Show illumination, that doesn't seem to make a difference. But these options here, diffuse, specular, and GI, I'll just ignore GI for now. Diffuse and specular are very interesting. Now, as you can see, when I move this, you can see this kind of specular highlight moving as well. If I uncheck specular, all it does is cast just the diffuse light. Now you can see that specular has disappeared. And we can do the opposite as well. I can uncheck diffuse and check specular, and now all this light is contributing to the scene is that orange specular highlight on the objects. So this is quite a neat little trick. Not many people know about it, but you can produce some very kind of interesting results by switching diffuse and specular on and off. And global illumination, as you know, is a kind of quite calculation intensive process where light kind of bounces around the room and picks up the color from an object and kind of carries that color to the next bounce. So this floor would maybe light up red slightly here, and obviously unchecking that turns off any kind of GI effects. So that's a very basic introduction into the lights, and in chapter 2 I'm going to go through shadows in depth. So I'll see you there. Thanks for watching.